Hey, y'all. Before we dive into today's episode, we have some incredibly exciting news to share. JT, drumroll, please.
You got it.
In just a couple of weeks, we'll be joined by Em and Christine from And That's Why We Drink. This is a huge deal for us, and we can't wait to meet them and discuss their upcoming book. It's going to be an episode you won't want to miss, so be sure to become a Parajunkie on Patreon for an early release and exclusive content. We'll be filming the episode on August 29th, so we will see you there and enjoy the rest of the episode. I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And today we are joined by Chemo, the Light Seer from TikTok. Chemo, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
I am so grateful to be here. So let me just introduce myself to all of your friends who are out there listening. Aloha kako. My name is Kimo Kipano. A lot of people have followed me on social media across all platforms, but I do speak on television, and I have gotten the opportunity to really work through education. And that's actually what I do. My job is to really assert myself to be a nexus point between education and what all things paranormal and intuitive.
Very nice. Yeah, so also, please do not mind if you hear loud thundering crashes in our background because it is
storming out.
Summer in Savannah, so it has been
a witching hour over there for you.
Yeah,
guys.
and if we disappear, it's because we've been struck by lightning. So,
well, we always blame it on gremlins when that happens.
Exactly. But awesome. So yeah, we're really excited to have you, Chemo. I'm very fascinated to hear kind of a little bit more about what you do specifically. Before we get into that, though, do you have any classes that you want to recommend for people that you do, or talk about your Patreon or where to follow you?
I would love that. So hopefully if things that I say starts to resonate with anyone and they're interested in following me, so you can follow me across all platforms. I am the Light Seer on TikTok, Aloha Light Seer on Instagram. I do have a YouTube account, but I also have a website, thelightseer.com, which houses all of my seminars. I do 2 seminars a month that you can log on and take a look at. I do offer sessions 5 days a week. And the way that I work by tuning into frequency and energy is to really help align physical ailments. I work with a lot of doctors. I work with a lot of scientists because of the way that my abilities manifest. And you can find all that information there. And I hope to see someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Okay, so definitely I'm going to ask you a little bit later about your abilities as a medical medium, because I think you are definitely the first medical medium we've ever had on this show.
Yes.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
And then, but before that, I do want to kind of start at the beginning, because I know that you said that you come from a long line of people with abilities in your family. So can you tell us a little bit about your history, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to recognize that there are all these wonderful differences between psychics and mediums and intuitives and seers and healers. There's major differences that sometimes feel a little convoluted for neophytes or for beginners who just are so new to all of this. So I'll iron that out just a little bit. I do come from a line of intuitives. All of my siblings are all seers. And it was like one of those things when I was growing up where I thought, this is just what the world is like. And then when I would integrate with other families, going to sleepovers, I was shocked that they wouldn't talk about certain kinds of things, not really realizing that it was specific to my family. But my grandparents are that way. My great-grandparents are that way. So it was just one of those things where this is what I perceive as my existence. When it comes to mediumship is particularly being able to find evidence of the dead. Finding information that you just didn't know before, meaning that you are the middle person between the living and the dead. And psychic work is utilizing your senses, and intuitive work is utilizing some kind of consciousness that comes forward. But seer is a little bit different. And it took me a while to kind of step into that role of seer. It is speculated by doctors that the reason why I see the way that I see is that I was dropped on my head when I was 2 weeks old, like severely, like bad, in the Honolulu airport. And what happened in Hawaii when I was dropped on my head is that it damaged my occipital bone and it changed my visual cortex center. Now, normally when that happens, a person just doesn't understand what they can witness. Like, I don't know that an apple is an apple. I don't know that a ball is a ball, but that's not what happened to me. So it is speculated that it is my origin story. Because for me,
Wow.
the world literally looks like frequencies. And it always has been. So by the time I was 3, I was communicating by spirit energy. By the time I was 4, I was doing genealogy work with genealogists, being able to identify locations and things like that. By the time I was in middle school, I was doing more big mediumship work, communicating to spirits. And by the time I was in high school, I was teaching. I was already teaching and doing workshops by the time I was 16 years old, really learning how to intuit information through people. And it wasn't until I was a little bit older than that that I started to learn that everything is frequency. Meaning that when I communicate to spirit, spirit looks like it moves in on a frequency. And then when I learned that I could do that by looking at the human body, for example, if I do medical work for the body, the frequency of your organs shifts when something is going on. Literally changes, the cells change. And then you can tune into synaptic wiring in the brain, you can tune into nervous systems, but it all looks like a frequency. So that's just how I utilize that ability for healing and for health and for psychic work and more. But technically, it's everywhere. Like it's around your building. It'll be around the blades of grass. And what I've also learned, as now that I am the nexus point between science and intuitive work, is if you can take those seership goggles and apply it everywhere, you get profound bits of information that can only be quantified by working with other kinds of individuals like scientists. So anyway, that's what it's like to put on these seership goggles. And when I'm not in session, I take them off and I try to be a normal person, but they're always there.
Oh, I understand that sensation. I have very different abilities than you do, for sure. But I understand the feeling like it doesn't fully go away, but you try to put on
You just turn it down, you control the levers.
Absolutely. So I think my first question really is, so how did you transition over to the medical side of things? Like, what was the call, if you will?
That happened in high school. Now, in high school, I was already doing sessions on my teachers. And I didn't like it, to be honest, because I already knew that I was perceiving a lot of really big, wild information. But what was challenging for me, because I was so young and I wasn't getting trained. I had done Aboriginal training as a young boy in Hawaii, but I wasn't being trained by any healers at the time. And my problem is that when I was working with adults as a young high school kid, what would happen in their body, my body would perceive it as if an aspect of it was happening to my body. And then it would haunt my mind. So if someone was experiencing some kind of psychosis, I'd go to bed with psychosis. And I would see what they would see, to the point where it became very invasive, where I would then tell my teacher the next day, I said, "You had a really wild dream last night." And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "That dream where you were running from this and doing all these things." And they said, "How did you see that?" And I was trying to explain at the time that I don't know how to break my connections. Because when I see, once I get going, it does not stop. And I have to work really hard to put the brakes on, because it'll go all the way down to the telomeres. So when I was doing physical healing, I was starting off by doing that in high school, then I stopped because I discovered a few different things. I could not get rid of the perception in my own body was point number one. And point number two that I learned is that everyone who goes through some kind of healing, it will come back within a matter of hours or days or weeks. Why? Because everything that we have going on inside of our body has some kind of emotional equilibrium. There's a balance there. And I wasn't skilled enough yet to understand how to work on the emotional aspect, not just the physical aspect, because I was just gunning it. I was just doing physical aspects. They would feel different, but then it would come back later. Why? Because you have to work on their emotions in order to sustain the body being different.
Absolutely. That's very
So that's how it
interesting.
started. But now as an adult, now I feel now I'm much better, much more trained and understanding of how things work. So it's not nearly as bad as it was.
And what was the process of training? I mean, How
Yeah. So
where would you seek out like the kind of help that you would need to nail down
it's
the
hard
answers?
because, right, Chris, it's hard. You have to identify what you can and what you cannot do. So I was, meeting with other mediums and then other psychics and other intuitives. What was challenging for me is that I wasn't being challenged. I couldn't find anyone that could go head to head with me. And I don't need anyone to, you know, make me feel like I'm the most important person in the world. That's not what I mean. I need to have someone who can challenge me instead of me challenging them. Something that happened to me as a young kid that I was very, very aware of is that people have a tendency to fall into limerence with me. They become very enamored by what I do. And I don't want that. That doesn't challenge me if you're enamored by me, right? I need someone who can really challenge my ability. So I finally found that as I was getting older, people who were aware that I was doing spirit work and things like that, but as I got older, then you find the practitioners who are able to challenge you, and which means that you learn neutrality, you learn discernment, you learn what is mine, what is not mine, you learn how to go in with no bias, no judgment, understanding the differences between what's just my creative mind, my imagination, my naturally wired projections, my instinct, my hunches, because it all feels like intuition, but they're all different. So in learning how to decipher that is when you really start to go into the hard training. And that's actually one of the things that I feel like is really hard for mediums. I have found that when I interact with another medium, I would say probably between 80 to 90% of mediums are just what I call garage mediums. They have a feeling, they have a hunch, they have an instinct, there's no training. And training doesn't mean you have to go through some kind of institutionalized training. That doesn't mean that. Aboriginal trainers like myself, we're not trained that way. But there needs to be training where you work on evidence-based information. So that way, we're not just utilizing my creative mind, which is a part of it, but I can't be reliant on that. I'm
Absolutely.
talking.
No,
Oh, no.
you are the guest
great.
here.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are just presenting you the
Soaking it
platform,
in.
if you will. But so, what is kind of the process of training? Like when you say, you know, that you went through these extensive sessions, if you will, with your Aboriginal training and then your training further on, what was kind of the steps that had to happen to get to you to the spot you are in currently?
Yeah, in the training that I received, a lot of it was test taking, meaning that I would be tested for my abilities. And predominantly with Aboriginal work, it's all land work. You do land work, you do medicinal work, you do plant work. And the test that I was being given is, let's just see if you can see this. Place your hands here. Can you understand this information? And it came in very, very fast. So then I would say, that means this. And they would say, okay. And then what about this? And that means that. And then I would be tested through all the elements. I had to be tested through fire. What can I see through fire? What can I see through smoke? What can I see through earth? What can I see through water? How can I understand how different chemicals can create different compounds to create healing practices? And that information channeled through my system. So when I realized that I was like channeling all that information, well, if you add this and add this, a little bit out of this, and they would say, how do you know that recipe? We haven't told that recipe to you yet. I was like, well, and it felt like I was reading their minds, is what it felt like, by pulling out and deciphering the stuff that I could see inside of their mind that all of a sudden became what was a part of my mind. So it was a channeled experience. So when that happened is when I became known as a high seer, meaning that you take your abilities and you align them into the service modalities, in service to other individuals, in service to utilizing all of these intuitions and more to be in service to the collective. And that's when I stepped into that role.
Very nice. Exactly. Now, when you finished, kind of your training, which I mean, of course, you're never fully finished.
You never fully finished, right?
But when you got to the point where you were comfortable enough being professional in this field, I guess, if you will, what was like one of the first stories or the first healing sessions that you ended up doing?
That kind of like sparked everything.
Yeah.
I started to teach in high school, and I didn't really want to teach when I was in high school, but I was being challenged by one of my practitioners that said, we really think that you need to be teaching. And this was at 15 years old. And I said, no, I'm not ready to do that yet. By 16, I felt like I was ready. And it happened instantly. And I decided to work with children first. So I was working with kids between the ages of 5 all the way to 18. And I would gather them into these great big workshops, and I would work with them I would do this. I started off in summer sessions. So I would do summer sessions 5 days a week, working with them from 8 in the morning until approximately 3 in the afternoon. And I just started to work different aspects of intuition. And I found that the predominance of what I was finding was evidentially always true. Meaning, if I can do this and utilize this and speak to them in this way, then change is going to happen. And it happened instantly on day number 1. So I did that. This was in Seattle. I did that from ages 16 all the way to 20. And when I ran that gamut over and over and over again, then I proposed my system to New York City. I was picked up in New York City. I flew to New York at 20 years old, and I started programs out there doing the same exact thing. And those programs are still running to this day. Even though I've retired from those programs, they're still running to this day. And since 1998. Now, I have a plethora of anecdotes that I could offer you, but let me just kind of pull into some of the anecdotes that I think are most beneficial. If we do spirit anecdotes, meaning that, again, for me, spirit comes in on frequency. When people say, oh, the veil is lifted or the portal opens, that is very visual. So let's just kind of back up for a moment. When I do spirit communication, if I'm working with a client or a child or an adult or someone who walks into the space with me, and if they were to say, I have a question for you. Now, before they finish the statement, I'll already note that, okay, they're about to ask me a question based on their grandfather, for example. And I would say, so you're going to ask me about your grandfather or someone who looks like it's your grandfather on your dad's line? And they would say, how do you know that? Because technically, when you create the thought process of wanting to connect to spirit, it literally opens information, which means that spirit energy isn't even connections to your thought. It's connected before your thought. It's connected to your synaptic response, which technically opens information up. And I say that because it looks like they visually move forward from me, coming forward in a wave of frequency. And that happens every day of my life. Every day of my life, I have to work really hard to put spirit into what I call waiting rooms. Otherwise, I get very overwhelmed. I had a lot of panic attacks when I was young because it's very overwhelming to see all the things that you can see. So in terms of spirit energy, I'll give you an anecdote that I think would be helpful. It's the understanding of the differences between, is that spirit or is that just some kind of residual energy? Spirit or residual energy? Because those things are often confused for the same thing, right? And how do we know the differences? What I have found is that the difference is the way that they communicate. Because you'll be communicating to residual energy, a ghost, for example, right?
Right.
You're communicating to some kind of echo of conscious energy. And as you are communicating to them, they will have aspects of information from the living, but no true identity of what it's like on the other side. And if you can get to information that gives you identity of information on the other side, then that's spirit. Otherwise, you're just talking to like an aspect of them. So I was working with a client one day, and I've been working, well, not one day, I've been working with her for a couple of years, an adult, a woman, much older than I was. And every time I would communicate to her, spirit energy that would look like some kind of like grandmother line is what it looked like, kind of like on her mother's side. Every time I would look at this individual around her, it always looked like there was profound shame in the family, every single time. And she was slowly working on that with me. And I gave her some exercises, and she would do them once in a while. Now, years go past, about 2 years go past, and she and I are having another conversation, and I'm watching all of this energy come into the room that looks like it is both spirited and echoed, and all of a sudden, the formation of how shame appears, because shame is a very visual frequency. When you look at how shame was perceived, it looked different for some reason. And I was talking to her, and she was about to do something very performative. And she says, I'm struggling right now because I have to do this very performative thing, and I always kind of rely on my old trauma, because it's about this trauma that I went through in connections to my family line. And I said, I have to stop you for a moment because you're about to tell me something that you have done that is about clearing energy out of the familial line. And she says, that's exactly what it feels like. She says, how do you know that? And I said, because shame that I've always seen as a spiritual frequency around you has now shifted. The shame it is not perceived in the same way that it was. It is all completely different around your body. And she says, That's what I'm trying to say, is that I feel differently about my connection to my past and my family. Now, how does that connect to spirit? Well, when she changed, when she got so clear, all energy spectrum around her gets clear as well, which means you get clear, spirit gets clear. So, what is the larger story? The larger story is that spirit and residual energy has the ability to connect to you in the way that you perceive it. If you can only perceive spiritual communication that feels nefarious and dark and dense, then my challenge to all the mediums out there is that you've got trauma work to do. You've got shadow work to do. If your only perception is nefarity, then you've got work to do. Because when you can push and challenge things that feel nefarious or even luciferic, when you can challenge that, I guarantee you, transmutation states that everything changes around you. Everything does. So that's just one little anecdote about that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I got so many more for you.
And it's very interesting because on our podcast we talk a lot about ghosts and how paranormal investigators kind of look at the spiritual world. And one of the things that we always get caught up on is that notion of the residual haunting, because what they split it into is residual haunting and intelligent haunting. And the problem is many times there are residual things that you can communicate with and get response to. And so one of the things that we've often said is like, the residual ghost, and we don't call it that because the terminology isn't right. But I love the idea of saying residual haunting and spiritual, entity, because the difference is clear that in certain cases the spirit can't learn beyond what it knew in life. So that's the residual. It echoes. It only has, but it can communicate. And that becomes the hardship is like we're trying to say that an intelligent haunt is one that communicates, but the residual haunt is void or vacant of communication. It's like, however, there are many options, many times when it seemed like the residual was communicating, was, giving information, but that information, of course, was very subjective to the knowledge of the being while they lived on Earth. So having that terminology, being able to suggest that any spirit that knows beyond their own lifespan you're now dealing with something extra. You have an entity that has realized its potential as a being, which is a great conversation piece. Which is great, because again, we get these questions a lot about I see this entity, or I have this experience, and by book. You're like, well, that sounds like a residual haunting. It sounds like something that is repeating over and over again in the same way. But they're like, and I communicate with it. It's like, okay, well, because now we're talking about intelligence and and going back and forth. So I love the notion that like spiritual acuity is a quality of the journey where. Our impact, our physical impact on the environment, and how we can stay behind in that residual haunt does suggest that we still can manage answers and manage to communicate, but we're stilted by the blinders of the physical life. And then, of course, if you can get to that spiritual plane where you've graduated, as it were, to know things beyond that life. I think that because there's a clarity to this that I think from this point forward we'll be able to add to the conversation, because I try to only suggest that I'm a paranormal enthusiast. It just fascinates me to no end. But the danger is you tend to sound like an expert at some point. And people are like, oh, well, you're an expert. Don't I? There's a lot I don't know, and most of it I don't know. But what I do know is this. And being able to add to that arsenal of conversation is so impressive, because the next question that I have, just from listening to what you've said, because you said that your siblings are all seers too, yes?
They are in various different ways. I'm the only scholarly seer.
Well, and one of the main differences is how you see, how you perceive, possibly because of the occipital lobe damage. or enhancement, however you want to put
Just
it.
blame it on that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's interesting to me is that means that had you not received that injury, you still would have been an empath of note.
I agree, I agree, and I utilize. I mean, that's how doctors are trying to quantify what I'm able to do, and
Okay.
it's fine. Regardless if that's the reason or not, who knows?
Understandable.
I can accept that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like where you're going with this. May I offer a little additional thought?
Oh, please. Yes, absolutely.
You know, I get asked all the time, especially by skeptics, and just for clarification, I really enjoy skeptics. Skeptics require evidence. You know, and skepticism and cynicism is different. Cynics, it doesn't matter what kind of stuff you bring in. It doesn't matter how evidential it is, they'll never believe you. So I don't pay attention to that. But skepticism is appropriate. It's very, very healthy for us. So if there are any skeptics listening to this, let's break this down a little bit more. Because you will always ask, well, then how can spirit communicate in multiple ways? How can an echo of conscious energy still have some kind of communication? Because spirit is multidimensional. Because it is multidimensional, it's hard for us to understand because we are not multidimensional. We strive to be, but we're in 3D bodies. We can really only perceive that, well, how can I not be in this physical body? At the same time as I'm doing dream work or something like that, how could that be perceived? Well, it's because that's how our brains are wired to think. But when you look at communication as multidimensional, I actually break it down a little bit further than just two aspects of spirit communication versus residual, because even residual can be broken down. You will find that there is residual that's just looped.
Right.
You know, I always perceive the same kind of energy in the space, but looped energy does not have a tendency to have any coherence of you. You do not exist for them. It is just energy in motion. And then when the intelligence becomes incorporated into that, that's when I would state that now maybe we're communicating to someone's father who's just crossed over, but every single time we communicate to him, he comes in quite curmudgeonly. You're to say, well, but that sounds like him. That's him. He was such a jerk. And how could that not be spirit? Well, I look at it differently. I look at it as a way to say, did we find evidence that sounds like your dad? He behaved in this way? Great. Now we have to transmute. Now we work on communicating to that energy that just gave us evidence of who we're talking to in a form that states, but what is the larger message? And again, that's where it gets tricky, because echoes of conscious energy does communicate as a way to give you some kind of impact of where you're at with your own trauma or belief systems, or giving you evidence of who you're speaking to. But the wisdom that comes in is spiritual. The understanding of the lesson from this life into the next life, then that's the spiritual plane. So it does get a little convoluted, and it does take some work for your medium or your psychic to be able to intuit that information. But to go even a step further, when you look at frequency, and I train people every single day. I work on training other individuals to go beyond mediumship and psychic work and intuitive work, to really put on their seer goggles. And in that, and it's a long process, but as you're training someone to understand how to tune into frequency, it's almost like you're being rebirthed, because you have to shed all of your normal paradigm of how I perceive the world. But when you perceive the world outside of that and you realize that everything is frequency, this is when the really phenomenal stuff happens. Meaning, if you're like arguing with your spouse and you've got some really large moments of frustration and umbrage, you're really, really angry, that, if you could just perceive it, has this huge cyclical frequency that moves around the two of you. And contingent on the perception of how angry you are, that pushes out into the biofield. And then that biofield, the two of you walk away, is still left in that space. Which means, technically, someone else who walks into the room, how many times have you heard, whoa, it feels bad in here, what's going on? There's some tension in the air. That's frequency. Being able to feel and sense that there is something going on that is weighted, but you can't see it, you can feel it on a quantum level, but that's frequency work. Meaning that so many of the times what you catch as residual energy that doesn't have a coherence around you is not even dead. Sometimes that is from the living. You will catch residual, two people arguing every single time I walk into this house and there's no one in there. Is that a ghost? What are they doing? But that argument is still residual from energy being pushed into their biofield after they have left, and they're still alive. So that's why it gets really confusing.
Oh, absolutely. I oftentimes use the radio metaphor for,
Yeah.
some people are adept at tuning, at going up and down the dial, and receiving other messages that, when people want to talk mediumship and they want to talk, these things, it's like, you kind of understand that perception is such a cagey animal when it comes down to it, and being able to come up with something just as simple as saying, there's a reality channel that everybody kind of tunes into, and that reality channel is basically what everyone agrees we should tune into. But there are gifted people who can go up and down the dial. But if you go too far away, what you're perceiving is too far from the reality channel for anyone to, relate to you. So what you're seeing, experiencing, and feeling might be too far in the frequency field for them to, and then we tend to institutionalize those people. But there's such an interesting thread that seems to be something worth pulling on, which is, do you have do you consult with physicists, about because a lot of what you're saying, endlessly fascinating, kind of has this impact of, well, okay, if we can hone in on a frequency and amend the frequency, then all frequencies around it will change and thereby improve, which in essence is almost the definition of like manifestation, almost the definition of altering a
You're
reality.
Right. You're totally right.
And so then comes the question, is like, oh, you're kind of talking about a quantum physics question of reality, of how tenuous reality can be, and how much we are suffering at a misconception of reality. My question to you is how far does the correction of frequency take us?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much. And I feel like now we're pulling all the strings of what is outside spirit work, right? The answer to that is, how far does it go? I have a hypothesis, an educated hypothesis, that it goes as far as we want it to go. Meaning, when I am communicating to someone, depending on how deep they want me to go into utilizing seership, spirit communication, no problem. Problems in the body, no problem. Problems in my past, no problem. But when you go further than that into the astral realms, you can find really phenomenal connective puzzle pieces that give you an aspect of identity of who you are today. But again, for me, everything has got to be evidence-based. I'm not a believer of platitudes. Oh, you were a witch in another life. You're burned at the stake. How many times have you heard that? It's like you make them feel good because they have emotions now, but it doesn't actually give them evidence of that. How far you want to go is totally up to you. Which means if you want to go all the way down to the beginning of the source point where you communicate to guide systems, I guarantee you, because I've done this many, many times. If I communicate to your guide system, and if I communicate to your guide system and record my voice, and then you go into hypnosis with someone completely different, and if you can get to that beginning origin of going into hypnosis, either in the quantum field or quantum healing hypnosis techniques, to find the very genesis of source connection, they will be the same. Now, I say that because it is perceived on frequency for me. When I'm looking at your guide system, Chris, it looks completely different than yours, Madison. It looks completely different. And then if you can get to that point where you peel that onion far enough into hypnosis, you will find that what we state here in this moment will still be found when you go into that unveiling. And some clients can do it very, very fast. Some clients, it might take years for them to get there. But I take extensive notes on everyone that I work with, so that way you have evidence and you have a curriculum of what you're working through. So how far do you want to go? Totally up to you.
So
100% up to you.
Are you using like Akashic records, sort of?
I was not introduced into Akasha until I was a little bit older, when I was doing yogic practices and learning that, this is where the Akasha comes from. I think it's a Hindu belief. The idea of Akasha is just that specific language, because Akasha, if you retranslate that, is perceived in all indigenous and aboriginal cultures, right? That just happens to be the name that we understand. So is it Akashic? Technically, yes. But you have to remember that Akashic can be some kind of life existence, predominantly in terrestrial plane. It doesn't always have to be terrestrial. It could be some place in the astral plane as well. But it's some kind of idea of living information. You can go beyond the idea of Akasha, though, meaning that what is the creative realization that happens before I go into amoeba and all those other things. So you can follow the seed all the way to there. And again, if the sitter has the ability to peel that onion, you will find that the information that you find at the very beginning of your genesis will be the same information that we intuit in your session. And again, I don't tell you that information from the very beginning, because I want you to discover it. So that way it feels more evidential for you.
Which is understandable, because you are right in the way that people do the past life regressions and things of that nature, where they're, giving you all these scenarios. And though, yes, you can have sometimes some very profound experiences when you're in the hypnosis, but it can still be written off as, I was just having a dream of what I wanted my past life to be, or whatever it be, So that is very interesting. So is it kind of based in the idea that energy cannot die, and so it's all kind of being recycled? Is that...
I challenged that idea when I was young, because it didn't make any sense to me. Although I do understand it when they say that energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? And I thought to myself, but how does that make sense? I need to find evidence of that. And here's what I have learned the differences are, and at least in the way that it looks for me. And again, everything that I say is based on the evidence of what I've been able to find as a visual. The differences between frequency and energy is a very, very finite line. Frequency, the way that I describe it, is that everything that is everything that is exogenous, everything that is outside of the system, it then turns and translates into energy once it becomes endogenous, once it becomes a part of the system. Frequency in a contained space. The frequency of my mind, the frequency of my energy work that I do. Frequency in a contained space then becomes energy. That's just the way that I think about it. Kind of helps my brain a little bit. I was going somewhere with that, and I completely lost track.
That's totally fine.
I'm so sorry.
That is totally fine. No, it's very interesting, at least what you have already said. So if you do come back to it, feel free to interrupt. But I think my next question would be, when you are in a healing session with somebody, is it really kind of the basis of your dispersing the energy of whatever the ailment is, or is it, would it be, I guess really the basis of the question is it a permanent fix, or is it just temporary to alleviate until that energy kind of collects again?
It's both. And here's what allowed me to really move back into healing work in a way that felt like there was longevity, because I wanted it to be longevity. When you are looking, well, I'll only speak from the way that that my abilities manifest and the way that I train other individuals. When you look at problems in the body, let's just say that I'm working with someone that has autoimmune, and I work with autoimmune clients every single day. So you're working with autoimmune. My goal and my job is to find what your autoimmune is in equilibrium to. Now, most individuals who have autoimmune have a very profound clair, one very specific clair in commonality. And I only found that by the fact that I notate all my clients, 10,000 clients, right? So by looking at all the commonalities, if I type in this one specific clair into my computer, it'll pull up all the autoimmunes. So that's how we started to find that the commonality is an intuitive aspect. However, it's not you doing this as an intuitive, like in the most expansive way. It's you ignoring it. It's you not paying attention to it. It's you letting it be dormant. So there is that commonality. But if you don't even think about it as intuition, just think about it as emotion, there are also major emotional commonalities with autoimmune. So what I do now is you look at what the problem is, whether that's fibromyalgia or rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. You look at what specific kind of emotion it's in equilibrium of. You work on the emotion of what that is by excavating that. And as you rebalance the emotion, autoimmune changes. Meaning that my clients will get back in touch with me within a week, within a day, within a few weeks to check in with how much have things shifted. So what that really translates into is that your pain paradigm, how you perceive pain, can be lifelong in terms of I have chronic migraines my entire life. We have chronic migraines that can change within 5 minutes by doing frequency work and never come back. We have some chronic migraines who they'll come in starting off at a level 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. Within about 10 minutes or so, we can lessen it down to a 4. Within about 30 minutes, we can lessen it down to a 2. It'll normally stay like that. Even if they don't do emotional excavations, it'll stay like that for several hours. If they don't do emotional excavations, it'll start to come back up again. And again, it just depends on the client. So the goal for me now is to work on the emotional aspects and how that is in balance. One thing that I learned that can be done, and again, I'm not Reiki trained, so I don't know how Reiki practitioners do this, but when it comes to healing work, if you can locate that something is going on in the body, let's just say that we're working with some kind of bone degeneration, some kind of stenosis in the back. If you're looking at it, and if you tune into the frequency, you will be able to see the fibers of the problem. A little bit of this is pushing into this part of the thoracic spine. A little bit of this is actually crossing the meridian. One day, as a curious cat, when I was looking at someone's body, I thought, well, I mean, it looks like it's right there in front of me. Can I just move it? And I was blown away that you can. You can just move it and push it. And all of a sudden, the body kind of changes a little bit. And the client will say, oh, I just got a little bit nauseated. What did you do? What did you do? Oh my gosh, I'm feeling a lot better. And when you realize that you can actually move and shift things that are going on, then it is also instant. So there's two techniques. There's the technique of the emotional equilibrium, and then the technique of learning how to, as you said, disperse. That's a great way to say that. Disperse and then retranslate where it's going to go, hopefully out. And then the longevity of it is now up to you. That's your job. That's not my job as a practitioner. It's your job to keep it out.
Wow.
So you're working more internally than utilizing things like sound cleansing and
So I don't do any of that, and I don't boo-hoo that. It is unnecessary for me. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work for other individuals. I think that people should use conduits if they need to, through tuning forks, through even tarot cards or pendulums, whatever works for you. Great. For me, it's just unnecessary. It never has been necessary. So I don't utilize any of that. Just the the power of your intention, right?
Absolutely. So now that we've kind of discussed the basis of your work, has there been a very profound case that you've worked on, or a super moving healing journey you've been a part of that you want to share to kind of give an example?
I'll talk about one of the hardest ones that I work with. I work with a lot of clients that experience psychosis. And psychosis is a very tricky one to work with because it's about the neurochemistry, right? Things are a little bit off, and there's many, many factors to psychosis, but the commonality of the emotions is extreme paranoia, and I get these kinds of emails weekly. I have multiple clients that work with this. That one is hard because when you are changing neurochemistry, you have to change the wiring. And I can only do so much. It has to be a proactive approach, meaning from them and from me. So that is the hardest one that I work through because psychosis can also be perceived with manic, disorders or bipolarity or schizophrenia. It can be worked on, but that one takes the most time. Most things that are physical ailments can be shifted almost instantly. And you'd be surprised what can shift. Even like a bone spur can shift. We have clients who have had macular degeneration, going blind, and it shifts within 45 minutes. Now, I would never, ever say that I cure anything, because I don't believe that I do. I believe that you shift energy with a little bit of an assistance from someone like me, right? If I say that I do it all, then all of a sudden energy has to go through me, and that's not appropriate for me. If it goes through me, then I won't be able to sustain any of that information. So the hardest thing is going through some kind of rewiring of the brain. The most exciting things that I love to do is simple things like it sounds simple, but someone walks in not being able to walk because they've torn their labrum, or they can't lift up their arm because they have, torn the fascia of the rhomboid or something like that. My fastest approach to those that is very, very, very quick is you change the pain receptors. And because you change the pain receptors, then you work on trying to bring the fibers back together again, which can take a few days or a few weeks. It can happen, but at least the pain receptors are gone, which means that clients we always test them before and after. How high can you lift your arm? I can't lift it beyond this. You do your work, you rechange your stuff, lift your arm up now. Well, I can't. Oh my gosh, my arms are over my head. It's this system of being able to change the pain immediately and then allow the fibers to start to connect after that. That's where it gets really exciting for me.
It sounds like it, And
There's a process of massage / physical therapy that has a similar tone, which is Traeger method, where they use like memory of joyfulness and a time of joyfulness to because I worked on a man who had frozen shoulder, but he was a fencer when he was younger, and you kind of like trigger the emotions of being younger and stuff, and it was like, show me, a lunge, show me a thrust, and now he's moving his arm to show you, and he's very excited about it, and he's very happy about it, and that puts us in this interesting world where it's like, the positivity of our own perception of the world has a deep, lasting effect on our physical nature. But the shame of it seems to be how difficult it is to convince people of that.
Right.
Well, let's go a step further, because sometimes you'll be working with a client who they don't see or perceive any change from the Traeger method.
Right.
Meaning
Right.
that I can't see things in my mind's eye because maybe you have aphantasia. My mind is blind. And you have lots of clients who can't conjure in their mind's eye. So my technique for that, if they can't see themselves in a place of joy, then what do? Is I actually put them in a place of joy. So everything for my clients feels like a meditation. They're just kind of hanging out and relaxing, their eyes are closed. But let's just say that someone comes in with some torn fascia, okay, in the rhomboid, and they have agnosia or they have aphantasia, they cannot see in their mind's eye. So what I do is I envision them fencing and doing pull-ups and lifting boxes over their head joyfully with a smile on their face, putting them in locations in my mind's eye. And I literally try to move. If their eyes are open, you would see me doing all this work with my hands. And then to go a step further, I have a quick conversation with what I can perceive as your guide system. And I make requests. Literally, it's like going to the office. Here's the request. Is it received? It is. Great. Let me pull it back. Then I put it right on over their body. And sure enough, when they open their eyes, arms go up in the air.
That's
even
amazing.
Though they do have agnosia.
Right. That's fantastic, because that also plays into many claims of spiritual protections and spiritual, because when people oftentimes they talk about the visualization of it, and if the person can't do it, then you can have someone else do the visualization for them, create the white box for them, create the protective shielding for them. And that's fascinating that it all kind of comes into alignment with the notion that it's not just spiritual, because people make that huge separation between the physical and the spiritual, and this notion that the spiritual happens in a nexus place and the physical happens, independent of it, or lorded over by it, but to make that assertion for people that, oh no, the spiritual world is everything. It's all inclusive. It includes the physical world, and if that's true, then our spiritual nature and our spiritual perception can affect that physical thing, because it's very difficult to convince people of physical change through a spiritual means.
I agree. So when I'm interacting with other individuals, and it's not always, but I have a lot of an older generation that I work with, people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They have a tendency to be a little bit like, my daughter signed me up for you. I have some problems, but yet when they walk out differently, they always come back.
Absolutely.
And so when we're working through that, I actually just code switch my language. I actually don't use the language of spirituality with them because I want them to be well. I want them to be better. So I find the language that is appropriate for them. So for example, for them, we talk about more the placebo and the nocebo. I understand that I can get better simply because I believe it. I understand that I am sick simply because I believe it. So when you understand placebo nocebo language, then they have a tendency to soften a little bit.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the great barriers, period, is language. It's the it's the fact that everybody wants things categorized and wants things to have, their individual definition without fail. That once it's defined, it doesn't get to change. I mean, it's one of the limits of science is once we make that scientific discovery, we kind of put a box around it and like, it's discovered. We don't have to worry about it ever again. We figured it out. And it's like 20 years later, they return and like, oh, you know what? Maybe we could have tweaked that a little. Maybe that notion could have used a little more attention. We just were so excited by that discovery that we think the act of defining is the same as creating. And then we're like, we've created the solution. It's like you didn't create the solution. You kind of discovered a solution.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. There's so many more ways to interact with it. Even I brought up physics earlier. It's like even physics is now having to admit that that not only that there were limitations, but that there are other physics. That there are other aspects of physics that we chose to ignore because the physics we were following made so much sense that why would we pay attention to non-Newtonian physics when Newtonian physics was doing such a good job? It really did define everything about our interaction with the world. So I'm utterly fascinated by the process of all of this. And do you have any books or any publications?
I should, right?
I feel like you should.
I've been slowly writing a book for a while, but when I work on the book, it vacillates into so many other directions. So I'm trying to streamline it, but I do have modular courses that I offer. I have a trimester release system that I do where people can learn about their intuitions first, and then next year we're releasing a whole healing module series that we do. I am in the process of being able to push these courses on Gaia. I do speak on the Gaia network quite a lot. So we're trying to cross-reference this because I really do believe, in connection to what you're saying about our growth and development, I do believe that we are at a major new point right now. If we take a look at our evolution, even of spirituality, for example, because spirituality was kind of like categorized in the 1800s and then Edward Casey in the early 1940s, we are at these pivotal moments where we're always at a place of growth, and we are at that place right now, where we are realizing how to bring in more of the quantum field through quantum science into actual evidence of information. And I say that because there are many doctors that I work with who are saying to me, Chemo, this is not our training. We have not been trained this way, but yet we know that certain things we can't say why they work, but we know that they work. So now, how can we blend those two fields together? And my only conversation with those kinds of individuals is because they find me. I don't go looking for them. So we're at this place where we're starting to change the foundation a little bit, where energy medicine, whether you're working on someone's body or you're working through someone in communication to their spirit and they feel differently because now my grandmother, I've never had a good connection with her and now I'm feeling better about that connection. Everything is about healing, whether it's just through spirit or that that's through the body. It's all healing.
Mm-hmm. So when I think that you may have made a post about this in the past, but when it comes to, trauma and emotional wounds, if you will, does that affect the body in certain areas, or is it just kind of an overall thing?
That answer is a little nuanced because, we have body coding and body mapping, and there's many studies that have been done on that have quantified that through what is the commonality of these people. Liver always stores this. I have found when the way that I work with clients that is mostly true. It is not 100% true, meaning that when I'm going through someone's system, I'll utilize today, for example, there was trauma being stored in someone's body, but in a very specific body part that was not the same place that trauma was being stored in the client ahead of her. And when we focus on what that is, and I identify all emotion in the body, this is going to sound so wacky, but emotions in the body are colors for me. And I don't mean aura, and I don't mean chakra, but they're colors. And I just learned how to code them. So like a very specific shade of purple is this, and a very specific shade of blue is this, and blue with white is this, and blue with gray means this. But when you find those locations that is like speaking the loudest in the body, and got it, her gallbladder, something is going on based in guilt with her gallbladder. If I push in, it'll show me an age range between the ages of 9 and 11, for example. Okay, so it does look like we had some stagnation happening around the gallbladder area, something based in this specific form of trauma from the ages of 9 to 11. And that client earlier went, how on earth do you see that? That is where my discomfort is. I did not even think about that experience between 9 and 11, but when you talk about that specific form of trauma, that's when it started. Why? Because your body is walking, living memory. And in theory, when I scan someone's body, I should see nothing, right? But that doesn't happen because we're human.
Right.
But the identity of that kind of trauma, though I can see it in the gallbladder, might be perceived in some kind of body code, body map as a different part of the body. So I would say that the way that I have found that to be true is mostly true. Many of the times it is true with the body code, but not always.
Understood. Yeah, because I've always found that interesting because I feel like that's become kind of a popular conversation people have. They're like, you do these exercises to your hips or your shoulders or whatever, and you're going to release this certain type of trauma that you have. And I've always found that interesting because I'm like, I agree. It doesn't feel very one size fits all because everybody is different. And
Well, it definitely also has that wonderful quandary of what it means to exist in a linear timeline when time doesn't exist. So so the trauma that happened is happening, continues to happen. Addressing it now is addressing it then. That kind of notion that time is kind of this weird illusion that we place upon ourselves to separate the dimensions of each second that passes or nanosecond that passes. And then now we're talking about, oh, you know what? It's connective. It's so connective, in fact, that it's affecting your health, your physical being right now. But it's the rigors of time and the rigors of not addressing it in time, at the time, but you can do it now. Because that's fascinating to say. I see this trauma event that seems to be the seed of this, disorder, pain, whatever, what have you. It's between this period of time, and it's like, why are you feeling it so distinctly now? What is that? It's like, well, it's still there. I mean, the time didn't go away. It didn't burn away. It didn't stop existing. The concept of energy never going anywhere. It's like, well, then what is time? Because it seems like it disappears. It's like, well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe the perception that time fades or goes away is something that needs to be addressed, because that very well could be why people are ghost hunting. That could be very well why people are having all of these past life notions and all of these other things, is because it's such a crude mechanism, time. And I love the concept of frequency, removing the question of time, because frequencies are forever. They're layered and they have all these aspects to it. And if you're not thinking that happened 10 years ago, but this happened in the frequency of my life, in the frequency of my existence, and could be singled out in the present and repair this thing that happened in the past. Endlessly fascinating, actually.
So now you're drawing the connective point between psychology and frequency work. Because psychologically, we say that everything that we store in our subconscious mind, everything that we have perceived in our subconscious mind, is still being there. Even though I haven't thought about that experiences between the ages of 9 and 11, but why is it still perceived in my body? Well, because our brains have a mechanism. Our brains are supposed to take away all the things that we can't survive on a 24-hour basis. So we suppress, and that's why you find by doing somatic work and things like that, that emotions will erupt from you as a younger version of you. So that's just the somatic style of that. When you take a look at the intuitive frequency aspect of that, then the language is actually very similar. The words are different.
Right.
Now, I think my next question is, do you think that, because we get asked a lot, how do I unlock my psychic abilities, my clair abilities? Do you think that everybody has that ability in them if they do certain exercises or certain trainings? Do you think anybody could unlock these sort of abilities?
Well, I know that that is true, and I'll explain that. Because if you look at everything through the lens of frequency, from healing to spirit and more, every intuition has its own frequency pattern. Meaning, May I speak openly to the two of you for a second?
Absolutely.
Meaning both of your dominants are very, very different. So, for example, if I were to look at you, Madison, are you sure I can speak openly? You okay
Oh,
with
yeah,
this?
absolutely.
When I look at you predominantly, you have what I think most people would consider clairaudient abilities. But what does that mean? Not even knowing you, we have never had an intuitive conversation. You have what I call horseshoe, which means that it's this really interesting pattern recognition of frequency, and it moves like a horseshoe around someone's area, around their crown, going from trapezius to trapezius. When someone has that pattern of frequency, I know they're clairaudient. I know that you actually can hear things that people aren't saying. I know that it's very hard to tell you a lie. I know that it's very challenging if someone were to say, hey, let's go do this. What you hear is, I think you'd rather go do something else. So why don't you just say that instead? Why? Because that shows up for you. So when I'm looking at a client and they come in and I say, don't tell me anything about anything first, let me just take a look at simple intuitive frequencies, meaning that you can find dominant, you can find recessive, you can find locked, you can find blocked, you can find dormant, you can find rising, because it's just a series of tiered systems. And your alignment will be unparalleled to someone else. You will be the only person who has your exact chemical lineup of frequency. And Chris's is different. Chris, you have this, but not to the same degree that she has it. Yours is going much lower in the body.
That was lightning. Oh, did he freeze? He froze.
no.
That was impressive because the lightning strike was right at a very dramatic
It
moment.
was. It was very dramatic. Hold on.
No,
No.
He's frozen. Oh, did the Wi-Fi go out?
Oh, no.
Wow. Are we still recording on camera? So we just had a lightning strike very, very close to the studio.
Like-
Literally, the light of it blasted through the door here. Yeah.
Let me see if I can connect to.
It looks like
That
we're
was
reconnecting.
insane.
Yeah.
That was absolutely nuts.
It was at a very high drama, like
Really?
yeah,
Yeah.
He was right on the
Great.
verge of saying something like
Okay.
significant, and it was like, oh, that's cool. That's cool.
All right. I'm gonna see what we can do here. Well, hold on.
It looks like it's,
Wi-Fi's back up.
right.
It looks like it's trying to.
It looks like it's trying to reconnect to the Zoom, so maybe we have to.
Jeez. This is crazy.
Oh, and what did you
So-
write, Jay? I couldn't. He was.
No, I was just
10-minute warning.
Okay.
So
what the heck?
we
Okay.
are experiencing some unprecedented, tumultuous weather this past week.
Seriously. This is unbelievable.
Maybe I could try to connect to my hotspot.
We'll see what
Yeah.
you may have connected to.
I had a feeling this was gonna happen.
Well, that storm was wild.
That just. All right, cash full. What the hell? Go off. All right. Madison.
Yes.
Go ahead and end. Jeez. Go ahead and give me an ending. Go ahead and give me an ending. Just say, explain everything. Because what I'm going to probably do is cut before that and then say after this. So go ahead and say, after this, Wi-Fi went out. We weren't able to continue to record. There was absolutely no way.
Okay. So you might be noticing now that we are speaking in a different tonation that the episode is kind of at an abrupt ending, if you will. Savannah has been having some very severe weather this past week. And currently, while we are filming this at this very second, it is absolutely monsooning outside.
Yeah.
And there was a lightning strike that was very close to our building that
We felt it.
we
So,
felt
yeah.
So we
I actually
basically
got it on tape, like the flash.
Yeah.
Y'all. Like, I mean, it might have struck right outside.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
It felt like we could see the bolt. You know,
Right.
like, yeah, the brightness of it.
Wow.
So yeah, pretty severe. And because of that, we are currently not able to continue filming just because this has put a very dramatic ending
Right,
to
exactly. Hopefully, we will be able to get Light Seer back for a conversation. But that was an amazingly wonderful conversation, full of wonderful insight, and yeah, I'm super excited to learn more about his work and what's happening, even if it's not through him returning, but paying attention to him.
Exactly. But yes, so you can find Chemo under the Light Seer on pretty much, I think, every platform that he has. He has a website as well
Yes.
that I know is linked in his link tree. So if that is something that interests you, that you
And
would
we
like.
discovered him on TikTok. So,
Yes.
follow his TikTok.
So yes, if you enjoyed that, make sure to go check out Chemo on social media and his Patreon website, all that good stuff. But with that, y'all, my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And stay spooky, y'all, and stay dry if you're in Savannah. My goodness.